everybody, and welcome to another episode on the John Scott podcast. And this is beautiful for us, man, because it's like I could just say X2 really, because I don't even have to introduce you anymore. He's now taken the title of the podcast. Not only has he been coming on and he's got the same name, but now he's also taken the name of the podcast as well. So really happy to have you on again, John, for this one. I know last time we went through our archives of one of my most fascinating parts in wrestling history, which of course was the infamous Hogan-Ric Flair match never taking place at WrestleMania 8. But obviously this one is a little bit further ahead in the time, but again does feature a certain Hulk Hogan and also another icon, I guess, in many ways, Shawn Michaels, to get into this. But first of all, John, how are you?
Yeah, I'm really good. Happy to be back on the John Scott podcast. The last time we spoke, it was WrestleLine, of course. That is no more. But the John Scott podcast, going from strength to strength. Really looking forward to talking about the Shawn Michaels Hogan match from SummerSlam 05, and all the kind of politics and stories and he said, she said kind of shenanigans that went on before, during, and after. So yeah, it should be a really fun podcast.
Sure, it's crazy to think this is like 15 years old. It's unbelievable. Yeah. My God, it makes me feel old. Because I consider these times as like more modern times, really, for my wrestling fandom. But we're going to talk about Hulk Hogan Shawn Michaels match that took place in 05. Again, it's one of those matches that it does get mentioned, but it's not looked back on as perhaps if it had have taken place at a WrestleMania maybe. And obviously there's a lot of hidden debate that we'll go into a little bit later about where this match, or was it best positioned at SummerSlam, etc., etc. But John, just to sort of do an introduction here then, where we're coming off of, we are of course in the land of, or back in the time of 2005 here, and we are coming off the heels of WrestleMania 21, which, by the way, is one of my sort of most favourite WrestleManias that there is. I just really enjoyed that WrestleMania, the whole theme that they had with Hollywood. Oh man, I was just really hooked on it. And one of the big surprises about that WrestleMania was, of course, having Hulk Hogan come out, and of course he saved Eugene. Everyone remembers that. From the infamous, of course, Muhammad Hassan and sidekick Davari at the time. And of course they were sort of like bullying him in the ring, that it's his time and all the stuff. And then all of a sudden, John, Real American comes on, and man, did that place pop. I watched it earlier on today before this podcast, and I was blown away because although Hogan was inducted the night before, he wasn't really. There was no promotion of Hogan being at WrestleMania 21. Now, I know for maybe a few handful of fans, they might have suspected he'd be there, but I don't think anyone sort of expected him to sort of do a run out and beat two guys up, throw them over the rope type thing. But what are your memories from this one with Hogan coming out? And was you surprised, or was you like me and, kind of saw it coming?
Yeah, it was a cool moment. It was a really cool moment, and having Hogan out there at WrestleMania Hollywood, it kind of made the occasion all the more special. He was there to kind of help give a little bit of rub to Eugene, who was quite a popular character back then. I quite enjoyed the Eugene character, to be honest with you, and I liked the way that he kind of ripped off everybody's moves because he didn't know any better, and he would always do Hogan's move, but for Hogan's come out, he made Eugene's night. Two big baby faces getting rid of the dastardly heels. The crowd absolutely loved it. Like you say, he was inducted the night before. I think Hogan had kind of been a little bit on the quiet side. I don't think we'd seen or heard from Hogan for a couple of years before then, or a little while, right, if memory serves me correctly. So it's kind of like another big return for Hogan. It just proves, like when he came back early 2000s as part of the NWO, and then had that match with Rock at WrestleMania 18, and then came back to the red and yellow, and his popularity was absolutely huge. And coming back in 2005, his popularity was still huge, to be honest with you, and massively over. And it was a very interesting 2005 for Hulk Hogan. He had a very, very interesting year. And as we're going to get to, I think the thing that it's most remembered was kind of the storyline after WrestleMania with Shawn Michaels. But I know we're going to get to it. But the WrestleMania bit, big fan of it, loved it. Pop's huge for it, and I thought it was great. At the time, though, I thought it was just a one-off. I did think it was just a one-off. I thought it was just capitalising on his Hall of Fame induction the night before, and I thought, it was just a one and done. Because once again, every time you see Hogan, you kind of think he's looking a bit more frail, getting a bit older. Can he have a run? Can he have a proper match? Is he just there for cameo appearances? And that's kind of what you thought they were using him for around that time.
Absolutely, and it's like John mentioned, Hogan had a little bit of a sort of time away from WWE. Obviously, we saw him. It would have been 2003, where he was doing the last stuff he was doing. You'll remember was the Mr. America storyline, which ended abruptly, shall we say. And then he kind of put Brock Lesnar on the way out. You'll remember. With a bear hug and sort of faded out, and that was it. And in this time, he'd started shooting his own reality TV show, Hogan Knows Best. It was one of the sort of, it wasn't like it wasn't one of the best, but it certainly was one of the first ones. I would imagine, I'm not sure if I'm right in saying this, but I would imagine he was probably the first wrestler that might have done that. Because obviously
it was in a similar vein to the Osbournes, wasn't it? The Osbournes had a reality show, and I think
it was
very similar to that.
Had one. Yeah. Remember that bloody Newlyweds, and there are a couple of little add-ons I remember being out. But yeah, he was in the midst of that. MTV were very much for Hulk Hogan at the time, and I remember it not being too bad, to be honest with you. But he was in the midst of still filming this, because I remember them showing footage of WrestleMania 21 in it, and all the behind scenes. But what also stands out for me, John, is the fact that he used the Real American song again, because prior to this, he'd been using, of course, the Jimi Hendrix tune, which I can imagine now there was some probably legal and copyright issues. I'm not sure if does that get played on the network? I haven't actually gone back and looked.
I don't think so. No, they've got some kind of more generic. NWO generic type music.
Okay. Yeah. But he was using that for a while, and that was the sort of only thing missing from the real Hulk Hogan that I knew. So this was the first time he come out. So that sort of made the pop even bigger, if you like, coming out to that tune. And it was pretty big. Now, Shawn Michaels on the other side of things, this is a guy who had an even longer period out from WWE not too long ago. This was only his second WrestleMania in the sort of second. I mean, it's hard to describe Shawn Michaels sometimes, because there's almost like two versions of him, John, to me. There's the 90s version, and then there's the sort of 2000s version. And, it could be argued that both of them, both sides of it would have easily been inducted either way. But obviously, attitude-wise, people were saying that Shawn had changed, his mentality was different, his attitude was better, etc., etc. And
he'd seen the light. He's a child of God.
And we were told very much, he was very much the baby face. He never really had, up to this point, much change in that. He'd had the stuff with Triple H. And so he's coming off, this was his third WrestleMania, should I say, because he had Chris Jericho, then he had the Benoit Triple H match from 20, and then of course this one up against Kurt Angle, which for me is one of the great gems that's out there. It doesn't get spoken about enough, in my opinion. Kurt Angle and Shawn Michaels. It was, for me, arguably, John, the best match of the night. I would say this one, hands down. I really liked Randy Orton and Undertaker as well. I think that was like my second favourite of the night, but this one stole the show for me. And of course, it was the sort of Kurt Angle moment for a change, because he sort of got the rub there. At this time, obviously, Shawn Michaels, John, as I mentioned earlier, he's at a very different point in his life. I'm not sure the politics were there to win belts and stuff like that. I think it was very much at this time, let's just go out and try and steal the show mentality, but that was maybe it. For you, John, how did you sort of perceive Shawn Michaels around this sort of time, especially around WrestleMania 31 with Kurt Angle?
Yeah, I think around this time, Shawn Michaels wasn't seen as anybody that's going to be going for the championship at the time, as you mentioned, and he was being used more as kind of a using his superstar status. And like you say, this was kind of the second chapter of Shawn Michaels' career. We obviously had Shawn Michaels in the 90s. This was Shawn Michaels in the 2000s. And what you had was you had more of a mature, more rounded professional that probably had, like I say, the whole game going on, to be honest with you, but was being used more to put on great wrestling matches, in more like I'm trying to stop myself from saying icon, but I suppose, in the mid 2000s, Shawn Michaels was getting on for being an icon. He'd already been in the business for 30 years, I think he'd achieved everything he needed to achieve. So titles weren't really his focus. To be honest with you, around this time, there was probably nobody bigger in the WWE than Shawn Michaels because of everything he'd achieved.
Yeah, no, I agree. Yeah, I think it was that's where he was at his time. It was a fascinating time, and I think Hogan being inducted at this time, very much at this point at least, wrestlers that were inducted didn't tend to have matches after. It was very much that's it. But obviously plans change, as they say in this now. The idea here to build to this match, this Shawn Michaels Hulk Hogan match, do you think, John, that this was something that was devised on the night or seen as a good idea, like maybe just after WrestleMania, this is a way we can do it? Because obviously it's worth pointing out that we get this formation of a tag team between, I mean, it's really out there stuff. Who would ever dream of Shawn Michaels and Hulk Hogan coming together here? But they're going to be a tag team because basically Hogan's got this feud going with Daivari and Hassan, and it's Shawn Michaels is going to come out, he's going to be his tag partner, and this is going to lead us into Backlash as part of it. Do you think, John, that they plan this backwards, or do you think this is very much just let's see where this goes and let's see how this takes place?
I'd like to think that they had it planned, to be honest with you, because when you're talking about big iconic superstars like Shawn Michaels and like Hulk Hogan, a lot of their stuff is kind of thought through a good maybe 4, 5, 6 months in advance, and especially if they knew that Hogan was making a return to save Eugene at WrestleMania 21, they must have thought, well, how what sort of agreement do we have with Hogan? How can we use him? What sort of storylines? Because I'm sure when they're negotiating with Hogan, they must kind of give him a little bit of an outline as far as how they want to use him or kind of potential feuds. So I'm sure it had been discussed between the office, between Vince and Hogan and maybe Shawn Michaels. So I got a suspicion that a lot of it was planned, but I think when Hogan received the massive response that he did at WrestleMania 21, that probably made them think, or it probably put them into overdrive as to think, right, okay, what can we do here? How can we capitalize on this? So it was probably more planned than not, but there was probably other things that kind of slotted into place nicely after that fantastic response he got at WrestleMania. But as it turned out, pairing Shawn Michaels and Hulk Hogan, the iconic figure from the 80s, the iconic figure from the 90s, was kind of like a dream, scenario, a dream pairing for WWE and for Vince McMahon. So, it's kind of one of those tag teams. It's almost like a dream match, but put into a tag team, isn't it?
Yes, yeah, very much. Now, I remember the feud with Daivari and Hassan. It wasn't, how should I say, it wasn't any, like, incredibly extraordinary, but it certainly was giving them the rub. Two young guys, working with two incredible names like Hogan and Shawn. Anyone will, and obviously it served the purpose for what it was meant to do. That was, kind of it, which made perfect sense. But it's fascinating because when, of course, now the big shock reveal, John, we're gonna fast forward a little bit here, but this is where I sort of want to get from mostly on this one, is that obviously the turning moment, John, of course, is that night where we see Hogan and Michaels